year was 1964, and the summer heat hung over Harlem like a wet wool blanket. It was a transformative year, a year where the old rhythms of the neighborhood were beginning to clash with a new, frantic tempo. The Civil Rights Act was on the horizon. Malcolm X was walking the streets with a fire in his eyes, and the old guard of the underworld was watching the horizon with suspicion. At the center of this shifting world stood Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. He was older now, the years in Alcatraz having etched deep lines into his face and silvered the hair at his temples. But he was still the mountain that did not move. He was the undisputed king of Harlem, a man who ruled with a chessboard in one hand and a straight razor in the other. But even kings have to leave their castles. It was a Friday afternoon in late July. Inside the immaculate, high-ceilinged apartment at Lenox Terrace, the air was cool, thanks to the rattling window unit Bumpy had installed for his wife. Mamie Johnson sat at her vanity, applying lipstick with a steady hand. She was a woman of breathtaking elegance, possessed of a spine of steel wrapped in silk and pearls. She was the only person on earth who could look Bumpy Johnson in the eye and tell him he was wrong. Bumpy stood by the bed, packing a small leather suitcase. He moved with methodical precision, shirts folded just so, socks rolled tight, his shaving kit placed in the side pocket. But there was a tension in his shoulders, a tightness in his jaw that Mamie knew well. "You're packing like you're going to war, Ellsworth," Mamie said, watching him through the mirror. "I'm going to a meeting, Mamie," Bumpy replied, his voice a low rumble. "But in my line of work, the difference between a meeting and a war is usually about 5 minutes and a wrong word." He was heading to upstate New York, near the Canadian border, a supply chain issue with the French Connection boys. It was delicate business, requiring his personal touch. He would be gone for 2 days. "I'll be fine," Mamie said, turning on her stool. "You worry too much. I have the doorman. I have the lock. I have that baseball bat you keep behind the umbrella stand." Bumpy stopped packing. He walked over to her, placing his large, scarred hands on her shoulders. "I don't worry about you, Mamie. I worry about the world. The world is getting crazy. The young ones, they don't have respect anymore. They don't know the rules." "And that's why you have Frank," Mamie said. Bumpy nodded slowly. Frank. Yes. Frank Lucas was the rising star in Bumpy's organization. In 1964, he was still the student, the driver, the right hand. He was from North Carolina, possessing a country charm that masked a predatory ambition. Bumpy saw himself in Frank, the hunger, the intelligence, the willingness to do what others wouldn't. He trusted Frank more than he trusted men he had known for 20 years. "I told Frank to come over," Bumpy said. "He's going to stay here, sleep on the couch, watch the door." Mamie sighed, a small puff of annoyance. "Ellsworth, I am a grown woman. I don't need a babysitter, especially not Frank. He talks too much." "He talks because he wants to learn," Bumpy defended him. "He's sharp, and he's loyal. I'd trust him with my life, Mamie. That means I trust him with you." The doorbell rang. It was a sharp, confident sound. "That's him," Bumpy said. He kissed the top of Mamie's head. "Be nice to him. He looks up to us." Bumpy walked to the door and opened it. Frank Lucas stood there, framed by the hallway light. He looked like $1 million in small bills. He was wearing a sharkskin suit that shimmered in the light, a crisp white shirt, and a thin tie. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He held a fedora in his hands, and his face was split in a wide, eager grin. "Afternoon, boss," Frank said, his voice thick with that southern drawl he could turn on and off like a faucet. Ready for the road? Come in, Frank, Bumpy said, stepping aside. Frank strutted in, bringing the energy of the street with him. He nodded to Mamie. Mrs. Johnson, you look lovely as always, like a flower in the desert. Mamie offered a polite, tight smile. Hello, Frank. Thank you. Bumpy picked up his suitcase. He turned to Frank, his expression hardening. The mentor vanished, replaced by the king. Frank, Bumpy said. Yeah, boss? I'm going to be gone 48 hours, Bumpy said. I want you here. You don't leave this apartment. You don't go down to the corner for cigarettes. You don't make phone calls to your girlfriends. You sit in that chair, you watch that door, and you make sure my wife is safe. You understand? Loud and clear, Frank said, puffing out his chest. Nobody gets in, nobody gets out. I'm the wall, Bumpy. Nothing gets past the wall. Treat this house with respect, Bumpy added, his eyes narrowing slightly. This isn't a pool hall. This is my sanctuary. I know, Bumpy, Frank said, looking hurt that Bumpy would even suggest otherwise. I got nothing but respect, you know that. Mamie is like a queen to me. Bumpy held his gaze for a second longer, searching for something, some sign of hesitation. He found none. Frank looked like the perfect soldier. All right, Bumpy said. He turned to Mamie. I'll call you when I get to the motel. Be safe, Ellsworth, Mamie said. Bumpy walked out the door. Frank closed it behind him, throwing the deadbolt and engaging the chain. He turned back to the room, rubbing his hands together. Well, Frank said, flashing that 1,000-watt smile at Mamie. Looks like it's just us, Mrs. Johnson. The first few hours were uneventful. Frank was, to his credit, professional. He checked the windows. He checked the fire escape. He sat in the armchair by the door with the newspaper, reading the racing results, seemingly content to be the silent guardian. Mamie went about her evening. She cooked a light dinner, roasted chicken and vegetables. She offered a plate to Frank. I couldn't impose, Frank said, though his eyes lingered on the food. Don't be silly, Frank, Mamie said. Bumpy would kill me if I let you starve while you were guarding his house. Sit at the table. They ate together. The conversation was light. Frank told stories about his brothers back in North Carolina, about the raccoon hunting in the moonshine. He was charming. Mamie found herself laughing despite her earlier reservations. Frank had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, a charisma that was dangerous if you didn't know better. You miss it? Mamie asked, clearing the plates. The South? Sometimes, Frank admitted, leaning back and patting his stomach. I miss the quiet. I miss the smell of the pine trees. But I don't miss the poverty, Mamie. I don't miss looking at a pair of boots in a store window and knowing I'd have to work 6 months to buy 'em. Up here a man can be anything. If he's smart, if he's tough. Bumpy says you're both, Mamie noted. Bumpy is a great man, Frank said, his voice lowering with reverence. He taught me everything. How to walk, how to talk, how to think. He's the father I never had. It was the right thing to say. It made Mamie relax. She poured herself a glass of water. Do you play cards, Frank? She asked. The television reception was poor tonight, and the apartment felt too quiet. Frank's eyes lit up. Do I play cards? Mrs. Johnson in Greensboro, they used to call me Ace. I play gin, spades, poker, tonk, you name it. Gin rummy, Mamie said. And don't think you can hustle me just because I'm a woman. Bumpy taught me. Oh, I wouldn't dream of hustling the queen, Frank grinned. But maybe we make it interesting? Penny a point? You're on, Mamie said. She went to the sideboard to get the deck of cards. As she did, she saw the bottle of scotch, Bumpy's expensive Glenfiddich sitting on the tray.
"Would you like a drink, Frank?" she offered.
"One drink." Frank hesitated, looking at the door as if Bumpy might burst through it. "Well, the boss said watch the door. He didn't say I couldn't wet my whistle while I did it. Just a splash." Mamie poured 2 glasses, one for him, one for her. She set them on the coffee table and shuffled the deck. They started to play. For the first hour, it was fun. Frank was a good player, aggressive but calculating. Mamie was more conservative, holding her cards, waiting for the right moment to lay down her hand. They traded wins. The atmosphere was convivial, almost like a brother and sister hanging out while the parents were away. But as the clock ticked past 9, the dynamic began to shift. Frank finished his drink. He looked at the empty glass, then at the bottle. "You mind?" he asked, pointing. Mamie hesitated. Bumpy didn't like his men drinking on the job, but Frank was a guest, technically, and he had been so polite. "Go ahead," she said, "but pace yourself, Frank." Frank poured himself a generous measure. He didn't pour a splash this time. He filled the tumbler halfway. He took a long swallow, sighing with satisfaction. "That is the good stuff," Frank said, his eyes a little brighter than before. "Bumpy has good taste. In liquor, in suits, in women." He looked at her over the rim of the glass. It was the first time the compliment felt weighted. It wasn't just polite anymore. It was personal. Mamie ignored it, focusing on her cards. "Your play, Frank." Frank played a card. "You know, Mamie, can I call you Mamie? Mrs. Johnson makes me feel like I'm talking to my school teacher." "Mrs. Johnson is fine," she said coolly. "Mamie," Frank said, ignoring her. "You know, Bumpy is a lucky man. I look around this place, the furniture, the view, you. It's the dream. It's exactly what I'm chasing." "You'll have it one day, Frank," Mamie said, "if you work hard and stay loyal." "Loyal." Frank repeated the word, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "That's the word, isn't it? Loyalty. I'd die for Bumpy. You know that." "I know. But..." Frank paused. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. The alcohol was starting to loosen his tongue. "But you gotta admit, the man is getting deliberate. He's slowing down. The streets are moving fast, Mamie. The Italians, they're moving weight, big weight. And Bumpy is still worried about the numbers game. He's still worried about playing nice with the neighborhoods." Mamie set her cards down. "Bumpy moves at the pace he chooses. That is why he is still alive when so many others are dead." True, Frank conceded, taking another large gulp of scotch. "But a man can be too careful. A man can get comfortable. And when a king gets comfortable, he forgets how to hunt." "Are you saying my husband has forgotten how to hunt?" Mamie's voice was ice. Frank laughed, waving a hand dismissively. No, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, maybe he needs young blood to remind him. Maybe he needs someone with a little more fire." He poured himself another drink. He didn't ask this time. Mamie watched him. She saw the change. It wasn't just the alcohol. It was the proximity. Being in Bumpy's house, drinking Bumpy's liquor, sitting with Bumpy's wife. It was intoxicating to Frank. It made him feel like he was Bumpy. "I think we should stop playing," Mamie said, gathering the cards. "It's getting late." "Aw, come on," Frank said, his voice slightly slurred. "I'm just getting warmed up. I'm down $3. He can't kick a man when he's down." "I'm tired, Frank. I'm going to retire to my room. You have the couch." Frank didn't move to get up. He sat there, staring at her. The charm was gone, replaced by a heavy, hooded look. It was the look of a man who was used to taking what he wanted. "You know," Frank said, his voice dropping to a murmur, "you're a beautiful woman, Mamie. I mean, really beautiful. Bumpy, he's a lot older than you, isn't he?" Mamie stood up. Her heart was beating faster, a warning drum in her chest. "That is none of your business. Good night, Frank."
15 years, Frank guessed. 20?
That's a lot of time. That's a generation gap. He's from the old world. You're vibrant. You're alive. "Frank, you are drunk," Mamie said sternly, "and you are crossing a line. I suggest you put that glass down and go to sleep before you say something that will get you killed." Frank chuckled. It was a dark, unpleasant sound. He stood up. He swayed slightly, but he was steady enough. He walked around the coffee table. "Killed?" Frank mocked. "Bumpy isn't here, Mamie. He's in Buffalo or wherever the hell he went. It's just us. Just you and me." He took a step toward her. Mamie took a step back, putting the armchair between them. "Stay where you are." "Why are you so nervous?" Frank asked, spreading his hands. "I'm just talking. We're just two friends having a conversation. I'm just saying, a woman like you deserves a man who can keep up with her. A man in his prime." "I have a man," Mamie snapped. "A better man than you will ever be." Frank's face darkened. The insult landed. His ego, inflated by the booze and the suit, couldn't handle the rejection. "Better?" Frank sneered. "He's an old man, Mamie. He's a relic. He's got arthritis in his hands. He's tired. I see it in his eyes. He's looking for the exit. Me? I'm the entrance. I'm the future of Harlem. And the future takes what it wants." He lunged. It wasn't a clumsy, drunken stumble. It was fast. Frank was a fighter, and even drunk, he had reflexes. He grabbed Mamie's wrist. His grip was like iron. "Let go of me!" Mamie screamed, twisting her arm. "Don't be like that," Frank hissed, pulling her closer. The smell of scotch and expensive cologne was overpowering. "Just one kiss, that's all. Just to see. I bet you've been wondering too. I bet you look at me and wonder what it would be like to be with a young lion." Mamie didn't panic. She didn't faint. She was Mamie Johnson. She had lived through gang wars, police raids, and riots. She turned her hip and drove her heel into Frank's instep, hard. Frank howled in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. Mamie yanked her arm free and shoved him. He stumbled back, hitting the edge of the sofa. "You stupid bit!" Frank started to shout, his face twisting into an ugly mask of rage. Mamie didn't wait for him to finish. She turned and ran. Not to the bedroom. There was no lock on that door that could hold a man kicking it down. She ran to the hallway. "Come back here!" Frank roared. The pretense was gone. The Southern gentleman was dead. This was the gangster. This was the violence that lived under the skin. He charged after her. Mamie reached the umbrella stand by the front door. It was a tall, ceramic cylinder. Sticking out of it, hidden behind a black umbrella, was a heavy Louisville Slugger baseball bat. Bumpy kept it there for solicitors. Mamie grabbed the handle. It felt heavy, solid, reassuring. She spun around just as Frank came around the corner. He was fast, but he was expecting a frightened woman cowering in a corner. He wasn't expecting a batter stepping up to the plate. Frank saw the bat. His eyes went wide. He tried to skid to a halt, tried to raise his hands. "Mamie, wait." Mamie didn't wait. She didn't hesitate. She didn't tremble. She channeled every ounce of frustration, every ounce of fear, and every ounce of loyalty to her husband into her shoulders. She swung. The bat whistled through the air. It connected with the side of Frank's head with a sound like a gunshot. Thwack! It wasn't a love tap. It was a home run swing. Frank's eyes rolled back in his head instantly. His legs turned to jelly. He didn't crumble. He fell like a tree that had been axed. He hit the floor face first, bouncing once, and then lay perfectly still. The silence that followed was deafening. Mamie stood over him, the bat raised for a second strike, her chest heaving. She waited. She watched for movement. Frank let out a low, gurgling groan. But he didn't move. He was out cold. Mamie slowly lowered the bat. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline beginning to crash. She looked at the man on her floor. The sharkskin suit was rumpled. The fedora had rolled into the corner. He didn't look like the Prince of Harlem anymore. He looked like a fool. She nudged him with her toe. Nothing. Mamie walked to the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of water and drank it in one gulp. Then she walked back to the living room. She didn't call the police. She didn't call the hospital. And she didn't call Bumpy. Not yet. She dragged the heavy armchair from the living room into the hallway. She positioned it right in front of Frank's unconscious body. She sat down. She placed the baseball bat across her lap, and she waited for him to wake up. Frank Lucas drifted in a sea of blackness. There was a thumping sound, rhythmic and painful, like a drum being beaten inside his skull. Thump, thump, thump. Slowly, consciousness began to claw its way back. First came the smell of wool carpet and dust. Then came the taste, copper and stale whiskey. Then came the pain. A blinding, searing, white-hot agony on the right side of his head. Frank groaned. He tried to move his head, but the room spun violently, sending a wave of nausea through him. He squeezed his eyes shut. What happened? Where am I? He remembered the card game. He remembered the scotch. He remembered Mamie. Oh no. The memory hit him harder than the bat. He remembered what he said. He remembered grabbing her. He remembered the look in her eyes, not fear, but fury. Frank forced his eyes open. The hallway was dim. His vision was blurry. He tried to push himself up, his arms trembling. Stay down. The voice was sharp, clear, and commanding. Frank blinked, trying to focus. Sitting in a chair 3 feet away, looking like a judge on the bench, was Mamie Johnson. She was still wearing her evening dress. Her legs were crossed, and resting on her knees, held loosely in her manicured hands, was a baseball bat. "Mamie?" Frank croaked. His voice sounded pathetic to his own ears. "Mrs. Johnson," she corrected him. "And if you try to stand up, Frank, I will hit you again. And I promise you, the second time, I won't aim for the head. I'll aim for the teeth." Frank collapsed back onto the floor. He rolled onto his back, wincing as the room tilted. He reached up and touched his temple. There was a lump the size of a golf ball there. It was throbbing. Did you hit me?" Frank asked, confused. "I knocked you out," Mamie said calmly. "You've been asleep for 2 hours. It's midnight." 2 hours? Frank's stomach dropped. The reality of the situation began to set in. He wasn't just hung over. He was in deep, deep trouble. He looked at Mamie. He looked at the bat. Then he looked at the telephone on the hallway table behind her. "Did you call him?" Frank whispered. The fear in his voice was palpable. It wasn't the fear of the police. It was the fear of Bumpy Johnson. Mamie didn't answer immediately. She let the question hang in the air, twisting like a noose. She watched Frank squirm. She watched the sweat bead on his forehead. "What do you think, Frank?" Mamie asked. "Do you think I called my husband and told him that his protégé, the man he trusted with his life, the man he let sleep in his home, got drunk and tried to force himself on his wife?" Frank felt the blood drain from his face. If she had called him, he was dead. He wasn't just fired. He wasn't just beaten. He was a dead man walking. Bumpy would cut him into pieces. He would make it slow. He would make it an example. "Mamie, please," Frank stammered, tears stinging his eyes. The pain in his head was forgotten, replaced by the cold terror of mortality. "Please tell me you didn't call him." "Why shouldn't I?" Mamie asked, tightening her grip on the bat. "You disrespected him. You disrespected me. You disrespected this house." "I was drunk," Frank cried, struggling to sit up on his elbows. "I didn't know what I was doing. It was the liquor. It wasn't me." "A drunk man's words are a sober man's thoughts," Mamie said. "You've been thinking it. You've been thinking you're better than him. You've been thinking you can take what is his." "No, never!" Frank sobbed. The tears were flowing freely now. The tough guy, the gangster, the prince of Harlem was gone. In his place was a terrified boy who had broken a window and knew his father was coming home with the belt. "I love Bumpy. He's my mentor. I swear on my mother's life, Mamie, I would never hurt him." "You tried to put your hands on me," Mamie hissed. "You tried to kiss me. Do you think Bumpy will care about your mother's life when I tell him that?" "He'll kill me," Frank whispered. He curled into a ball, hiding his face in his hands. "He'll kill me. Oh God, he'll kill me." Mamie watched him. It was a pathetic sight. This man who walked the streets like a giant, who terrified shopkeepers and rivals, was reduced to a puddle of tears on her hallway rug. She felt a flicker of disgust, but also a flicker of pity, not because she liked him, she hated him in this moment, but because she knew he was right. If she told Bumpy, Frank Lucas would die, tonight, and it would be a war. Frank had friends. Frank had family. If Bumpy killed him, it might start a civil war within the organization. It might bring the police down on everything Bumpy had built, and she didn't want Bumpy to have to do it. She didn't want her husband to have to stain his hands with the blood of someone he considered a son. It would break Bumpy's heart before it broke Frank's neck. Mamie stood up. She tapped the bat against the floor. Thud. "Sit up," she ordered. Frank scrambled to a sitting position, wiping his nose on his sleeve. He looked up at her with red, swollen eyes. "Listen to me closely, Frank," Mamie said, "because I am only going to say this once, and your life depends on it." Frank nodded frantically. I'm listening. "I haven't called him," Mamie said. Frank let out a breath that sounded like a dying man gasping for air. "Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mamie. Thank you." "Shut up," she snapped. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for him. I don't want him to go to prison for killing a piece of trash like you. And I don't want him to know that his judgment was so poor that he let a snake into his house." "I'm sorry," Frank wept. "I'm so sorry. I'll do anything. I'll leave town. I'll go back to North Carolina. Just say the word." "You aren't going anywhere," Mamie said, "because if you run, Bumpy will know something happened. And if he starts asking questions, he will find the answer. You are going to stay right here in Harlem. You are going to do your job. You are going to earn for him. You are going to smile and say, "Yes, boss. Okay, I can do that." "But," Mamie leaned down, bringing her face close to his. Her eyes were hard as diamonds. "If you ever look at me the wrong way again, if you ever disrespect my husband again, if you ever drink a drop of liquor in my presence again." She poked him in the chest with the end of the bat. Hard. "I won't call Bumpy," Mamie whispered. "I'll handle it myself. You felt this bat once, Frank. Imagine what it feels like when I don't stop swinging. Imagine what it feels like when I use a knife while you're sleeping." Frank stared at her. He realized in that moment that he had misjudged everything. Bumpy wasn't the only dangerous person in the Johnson family. Mamie was a lioness. "I understand," Frank whispered. "I swear, Mrs. Johnson, never again." "Get up," Mamie said, stepping back. Frank struggled to his feet. He was unsteady, swaying. He looked at the door. "Get out," Mamie said. "But Bumpy said I couldn't leave," Frank said, terrified of disobeying the order. "He said watch the door." "I'm watching the door now," Mamie said. "Get out of my house. Go home. Put ice on your head. And if anyone asks, you walked into a door." Frank grabbed his fedora from the corner. He didn't put it on. He clutched it to his chest. He backed toward the door, never taking his eyes off the bat. "Thank you," he mumbled. "Thank you." He fumbled with the locks, his hands shaking so bad it took him 3 tries to open the deadbolt. Finally, the door opened. He stumbled out into the hallway, almost tripping over his own feet. Mamie slammed the door behind him. She locked it. She threw the deadbolt. She engaged the chain. She leaned her back against the door and slid down until she was sitting on the floor. She put the bat down. Her hands started to shake. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only exhaustion. She touched her face. She was crying. Not from fear, but from anger. From the sheer, exhausting weight of being a woman in a world of violent men. She looked at the empty scotch glass on the table. She stood up, walked over, and picked it up. She went to the kitchen and threw it in the trash. She washed the bottle and put it away. She cleaned the ashtray. She straightened the rug. By the time Bumpy came home 2 days later, the apartment was spotless. When Bumpy walked in, tired and dusty from the road, Mamie was reading a book on the sofa. "I'm home," Bumpy said, dropping his bag. "Everything okay? Where's Frank?" Mamie stood up and kissed him. "Everything is fine, Ellsworth. Frank had to leave early. He said he had a headache." Bumpy frowned. "A headache? Soft. I'll have to talk to him about that." "Don't be too hard on him," Mamie said, smiling a secret, dangerous smile. "I think he learned his lesson." Bumpy looked at her, confused but happy to be home. "All right, as long as you're safe." "I'm always safe with you," Mamie said. And somewhere in Harlem, Frank Lucas sat in his apartment, holding a bag of ice to his head, staring at the wall, knowing that he was alive only by the grace of the queen he had tried to dethrone. The darkness was not absolute. It was a throbbing, red-tinged blackness, pulsating in rhythm with the agony that was currently splitting Frank Lucas's skull in two. He was floating in a void, disconnected from his body. For a long time, there was only the sensation of nausea and a high-pitched ringing sound. Then, sensation returned. The first thing Frank felt was the carpet. It was rough wool, pressing against his cheek, smelling of lemon polish and blood. The second thing he felt was the cold. A draft was sweeping across the floor, chilling the sweat that had soaked through his sharkskin suit. The third thing he felt was fear. It wasn't the rational fear of a man in a street fight. It was the primal terror of an animal that wakes up in a trap. It was the fear of a man who knows he has made a fatal error. Frank groaned. The sound was wet and pathetic. He tried to move his right arm, but his muscles felt like water. He tried to lift his head, and the world spun violently. He gagged, fighting down the urge to vomit onto Bumpy Johnson's pristine hallway runner. What happened? Where am I? Memory was a shattered mirror. Shards of images floated in the fog. The amber glow of the Glenfiddich bottle. Mamie's laugh, polite then guarded. The heat in the room. The arrogance swelling in his chest. The grab, the struggle. The look in her eyes, not fear but fury. The wood, the blur of motion, the impact. Oh God. Frank Lucas, the man who walked through Harlem like he owned the pavement, squeezed his eyes shut as the reality crashed down on him. He hadn't just gotten drunk. He hadn't just made a pass. He had assaulted the wife of Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson in her own home, and she had put him down like a rabid dog. Frank forced his eyes open. His vision was swimming, doubled and blurry. He was lying on the floor of the hallway. The only light came from the street lamp outside, filtering through the shears. The apartment was deadly silent. He pushed himself up onto his elbows. His head felt like a lead weight. He reached up and touched his temple. His fingers came away sticky. A lump the size of a lemon was rising there, hot and pulsing. I wouldn't move too fast, Frank. The voice came from the shadows. It was calm, cold, terrifying. Frank froze. He squinted into the gloom. Sitting in a high-backed dining chair dragged into the hallway, blocking his path to the door, was Mamie Johnson. She was a silhouette against the faint light. She sat with perfect posture, legs crossed at the ankle. She was still wearing her evening dress. But the domestic image was shattered by what lay across her lap, the Louisville Slugger. It looked enormous in the dim light. She held it loosely, her fingers resting on the taped handle like a queen holding a scepter. "Mamie," Frank croaked. His voice was a broken whisper. "Mrs. Johnson," she corrected him. Her tone didn't rise. It cut through the silence like a scalpel. "And if you try to stand up, Frank, I will hit you again. And I promise you, the second time, I won't aim for the head. I'll aim for the teeth." Frank collapsed back onto the floor, his strength abandoning him. He rolled onto his back, tears of pain and terror leaking from the corners of his eyes. "What time is it?" he whispered. "It's 3 a.m, Mamie said. "You've been out for 4 hours. 4 hours? Frank's heart hammered. 4 hours was a lifetime. 4 hours was enough time to make a phone call, enough time to call a cleaner, enough time to call him. "Did you?" Frank couldn't finish the sentence. He swallowed hard, tasting copper. "Did you call him?" Mamie didn't answer immediately. She let the silence stretch. She picked up a glass of water from the small table beside her and took a slow, deliberate sip. The sound of the ice clinking was deafening. "Why shouldn't I?" she asked finally. "You were supposed to be the guard, the trusted lieutenant. Bumpy brought you into this house. He fed you. He taught you. And the moment he turns his back, you try to steal from him?" "I was drunk," Frank sobbed. The excuse spilled out of him, desperate and weak. "I didn't mean it, Mrs. Johnson. It was the liquor. It wasn't me. I swear on my mother's eyes." "The liquor didn't grab my arm," Mamie said, her voice hard as granite. "The liquor didn't try to pull me down. You did, Frank. The liquor just showed me who you really are. A greedy little boy who wants what his father has." She leaned forward. The chair creaked. Frank flinched, curling into a ball. Please, he begged, please don't tell him. If you tell him, he'll kill me. You know he will. He won't just shoot me. He'll take me apart. Frank knew Bumpy's reputation. He knew about the switchblades in the rain. He knew about the men who went for a drive and never came back. Bumpy Johnson was a man of honor, but his honor was built on absolute violence against those who betrayed him. He would be within his rights, Mamie mused. In fact, if I call him right now, at his motel in Buffalo, he would probably drive back tonight. He would be here by sunrise, and by breakfast, you would be at the bottom of the East River. I'm begging you, Frank wept. He tried to crawl toward her. I'll do anything. I'll leave town. I'll go back to North Carolina. I'll disappear. Just don't make that call. I don't want to die. Mamie watched him. She saw the snot running down his nose. She saw the blood matting his hair. He looked pathetic. The Prince of Harlem was gone. In his place was a terrified child, and that was exactly what she needed. Mamie Johnson was not a killer. She was a survivor. She knew that killing Frank Lucas would solve one problem, but create 10 others. Frank ran the numbers. He knew the routes. If he disappeared overnight, the organization would bleed. Chaos would follow. Furthermore, she loved her husband. She didn't want Bumpy to have to be the executioner tonight. She wanted to be the judge. She didn't want this stain on his soul. Sit up, Mamie ordered. Frank scrambled to obey. He pushed himself into a sitting position, wiping his face with his sleeve, leaving a smear of blood. He looked at her like a dog waiting to be kicked. I haven't called him, Mamie said. Frank let out a sound that was half gasp, half shriek. Oh, thank you. Thank God. Thank you, Mamie. Shut up, Mamie snapped. She slapped the bat into her open palm. Crack. I didn't do it for you. Don't you dare think I have mercy for you. You are a dog, Frank. You are less than a dog. I know, Frank whispered. I did it for Ellsworth, she continued, because he loves you. God knows why, but he sees a son in you. And if he had to kill you, it would break his heart. I protect him from everything, even from trash like you. She stood up, towering over him. So here is the deal, Mamie said. I am going to give you a gift, Frank. I am going to give you your life. But it comes with a price. Name it, Frank said instantly. Money? I can get you $10,000 by morning. Mamie laughed harshly. I don't want your blood money. I want your soul. I want your fear. She took a step closer, the bat hovering inches from his face. From this moment on, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, you belong to me. You think you work for Bumpy? No, you work for me. You are going to be the best soldier this family has ever seen. You are going to earn more, work harder, and stay later than anyone else. You are going to protect my husband with your life. I will, Frank promised, nodding frantically. I swear I will. And Mamie added, you will never, ever drink a drop of alcohol again, because clearly you cannot handle it, and I will not have a drunk guarding my home. Done, Frank said. I'll pour it all down the sink. Tonight. And finally, Mamie said, leaning down. She smelled of lavender and steel. If you ever look at me, if you ever speak to me with anything other than absolute respect, she poked him in the chest with the end of the bat. Hard. I won't call Bumpy, Mamie whispered. I won't need him. I grew up in North Carolina too, Frank. I know how to skin a rabbit. Do you understand me? The threat was vivid. Frank looked into her eyes and saw something there that scared him more than Bumpy ever had. This was personal. "I understand," Frank whispered. "I swear, Mrs. Johnson, never again." Mamie stared at him for 10 seconds, letting the fear bake into his bones. "Get out," she said. Frank scrambled to his feet. The world tilted violently. He looked at the door. It seemed miles away. "My hat," he mumbled, looking around in confusion. "Leave it," Mamie said. "Consider it a reminder of what you left behind here. Your dignity." Frank didn't argue. He stumbled to the door. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't work the latch. He fumbled with the deadbolt, scratching the brass plate. Finally, the lock clicked. He threw the door open and fell into the hallway. "Frank," Mamie called out. He froze. He turned back slowly. Mamie was standing in the center of the room. "If anyone asks," she said, "you walked into a door." Frank nodded. He touched the bleeding lump on his head. "Yes, ma'am. A door." He closed the door. He heard the locks engage instantly. Frank leaned against the wall of the corridor and slid down until he was sitting on the cold tile. He wept. He cried for the pain in his head, for the shame in his heart, and for the realization of how close he had just come to the end. Inside the apartment, Mamie Johnson waited until she was sure he was gone. She stood up. Her legs were trembling now. The adrenaline was fading. She walked to the kitchen and dropped the baseball bat onto the table. She went to the sink and scrubbed her hands until they were red. Then she walked into the living room. The bottle of Glenfiddich was still on the tray. Mamie picked it up. She poured it down the drain. She threw the crystal glass Frank had used into the trash. She scrubbed the spot on the rug where Frank had bled until her knuckles were white. Then she sat in the armchair by the window. She watched the sun come up over Harlem, guarding her castle, knowing that the dragon had been slain by the queen herself. The next 48 hours were a descent into paranoia for Frank Lucas. He went to the dingy back room of a pool hall on 125th Street. He locked the door, shoved a chair under the handle, and sat in the dark. Every time the phone rang, he jumped. Every time a car slowed down outside, he reached for his gun. Did she lie? Did she let me go just to lull me into a false sense of security? Is she calling Bumpy right now? He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the bat swinging. He saw Mamie sitting in that chair. He went to the tiny bathroom mirror. The lump on his head had turned a grotesque purple. His eye was swollen shut. He looked like a monster. "Walked into a door," he whispered to his reflection. He gathered every bottle of liquor in the office and poured them all down the sink. He vowed to never let anything cloud his judgment again. By Sunday afternoon, Frank was a wreck. Then, the call came. The phone rang. Frank stared at it. He picked it up, his hand shaking. "Yeah?" "Frank." It was Bumpy's voice. Frank's heart stopped. The receiver felt slippery. This was it. "Hey, boss," Frank said, his voice cracking. You back?" "Just pulled in," Bumpy said. He sounded tired. "Normal. I'm at the apartment. Come over. We need to debrief on the French shipment. And bring the ledger." Frank closed his eyes. The trap. Lure him in, get the information, then put a bullet in the back of his head. "Sure, boss," Frank said. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "And Frank?" "Yeah? Pick up some cigars on the way. The Cuban ones." Click. Frank stared at the receiver. Cigars? Was Bumpy playing with him? Frank stood up. He washed his face with cold water. He put on fresh sunglasses to hide the black eye. He put on his hat. He checked his gun, then decided to leave it. If Bumpy was going to kill him, He wouldn't fight back. He walked to Lenox Terrace. It was the longest walk of his life. He stood in front of the apartment door. Number 4G. He knocked. The door opened. It was Mamie. Frank flinched, taking a step back. Mamie was wearing an apron. She smelled of roasting chicken. She looked at him with cool, impassive eyes. No anger, no fear, just a blank wall. "Hello, Frank," she said. "Mrs. Johnson," Frank whispered. He searched her face for a sign. "Did you tell him?" She stepped aside. "He's in the study." Frank walked into the apartment. It was spotless. There was no sign of the struggle, no blood on the rug. The umbrella stand was in its place. The bat was hidden. He walked to the study. Bumpy was sitting behind his desk, counting stacks of money. He looked up. "Frank," Bumpy said, smiling. "Good to see you. How was the weekend?" Frank froze. He looked for the tell, the coldness in the eyes, the reach for the gun. Bumpy looked normal. "It was quiet, boss," Frank said, exhaling. "Real quiet. Just watched the door like you said. Read the paper." Bumpy nodded, satisfied. He pointed to Frank's face. "What happened to your eye?" Frank's heart hammered. This was the test. Mamie was standing in the doorway behind him. He could feel her presence. Frank stammered. He took off the glasses. "I was at my place last night. Got up to get a glass of water in the dark. Tripped on a rug. Smacked my face right into the bathroom door frame. Hurt like hell." Bumpy stared at the bruise. Then he laughed. "A door? Frank, you're supposed to be a gangster. You can't be getting beat up by furniture." "I know, boss," Frank said, forcing a weak smile. "Clumsy." "Well, sit down," Bumpy said. "Pour yourself a drink. There's scotch on the tray." Frank looked at the crystal decanter. The Glenfiddich. He felt sick. "No thanks, boss," Frank said quickly. I'm laying off the stuff. Trying to keep a clear head." Bumpy raised an eyebrow. "Really? Since when?" "Since this weekend," Frank said. "Figured I need to stay sharp. For the business." Bumpy nodded slowly, impressed. "Good. I like that. Discipline." He looked past Frank, at Mamie in the doorway. "Mamie says you were a perfect gentleman," Bumpy said. "Says you were respectful, quiet." Frank turned his head slowly. He met Mamie's eyes. She offered him a tiny, imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of forgiveness. It was a nod of ownership. "I own you." "She's a great lady, boss," Frank said, his voice trembling with sincerity. "You're a lucky man. The luckiest man in Harlem." "I know I am," Bumpy said, winking at his wife. "All right, let's get to work." Frank sat down. But inside, Frank Lucas was changed. The arrogance was gone. He realized then that he would never challenge Bumpy Johnson. Not because he feared Bumpy, though he did, but because he feared the woman standing in the kitchen. As he left the apartment an hour later, Bumpy walked him to the door. "You did good, Frank," Bumpy said, clapping him on the shoulder. "I knew I could trust you. You're like family." Frank flinched at the touch. "Always, boss. Family." "Get some ice on that eye," Bumpy said. He walked out into the hallway. He heard the door close and lock. Click. Frank walked to the elevator. He leaned his forehead against the cool metal doors. He was alive. He was safe. But he was different. He was no longer the wolf. He was the watchdog. And the leash was in Mamie Johnson's hand. Inside the apartment, Bumpy sat back down at his desk. Mamie came in with 2 cups of coffee. "Frank seems focused," Bumpy noted. "He just needed a little direction," Mamie said, sipping her coffee. "He's a good boy." He just needs to be reminded of his place sometimes. Bumpy smiled, taking her hand. He kissed her knuckles. He didn't see the slight bruising on her wrist. He didn't see the shadow behind her eyes. "You're amazing, Mamie," Bumpy said. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd be lost," she teased gently. "I probably would be," Bumpy admitted. He went back to his work. Mamie walked to the window. She looked down at the street. She saw Frank Lucas exiting the building, looking over his shoulder, walking fast, disappearing into the Harlem night like a ghost. She touched the cool glass. She had kept the peace. She had saved her husband's soul from another murder. And she had tamed a monster with nothing but a piece of wood and her own will. It had been a hard weekend. But the house was still standing, and the Queen was still on her throne. Thanks for listening, folks. If you liked that video and want more, be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any Bumpy Johnson stories.